Ideally, your first employees should have traits of founders. They should be either people who have tried to be founders in the past or will want to be founders one day. Because as you're trying to figure out things for product to get to product market fit, the reality is that there are way too many unknowns, and it takes a very special type of person to be able to thrive in this obscurity.
Today's episode is about arguably the most important thing to get right early on, which is hiring. Our guest today is truly excellent at it, which you'll learn for yourself during this episode with Anis Bennaceur, the co-founder and CEO of Attention, a startup building AI agents that learn from your best sales conversations. Anis is a second-time founder, and to date, Attention has raised close to 20 million from the likes of our friends at Eniac, 645 Ventures, Liquid2 Ventures, and Alvin. With that, welcome, Anis. It's great to have you on, and I'm very excited about this one.
Thanks, Pascal. Very excited to be here.
Amazing. So today's topic is arguably the most important thing you have to get right when building a startup, which is hiring. Now, before we dive deep into the nuances of startup hiring, I'd love to first discuss a great framework for assessing talent, which is the triangle of talent. Can you briefly explain what it is and how it's impacted how you go about hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. So this came from Shan Kuri, by the way. So extremely helpful in kind of visualizing the different levels of talent that you want to hire and how you want to train them. So let's go into the bottom level, which is what he calls useless. It's the kind of talent that you tell them, even if you tell them what to do and exactly how to do it, they rarely do it right. The level above is what's being called the task donkey, which is you tell them what to do, how to do it, and when to do it, and they'll get it actually done. Level 3 is the problem solver. So you tell them what to do, and they figure out how, right? You don't have to tell them exactly each step, but they'll know how to solve it. The systems thinker actually is the type of person that you tell them the problem, and they'll figure out how to set up a system, figure out who are the people to put in place, the process, and so on. And then a superstar is the person that is able to identify the right problem in the first place and get it solved, right? So what's really important to have in mind here is that it does not, the job title does not matter, right? Every employee is a problem solver. It could be from the junior person to the most senior person that you have. You'll see some pretty young people at a company with incredible slope that are superstars, and then you'll see people with a ton of experience who are actually not that high on your triangle of talent. And so your goal as a startup, especially when there's a ton of intensity, is to figure out how much you can, how you can basically maximize for level 5 in your team, right? Just take a second to reflect, look at how many people you have at your company and try to think how many of those are level 5s. And if you have level 1s or 2s, so level 1s, you should definitely get rid of them as fast as possible. Level 2s will drag down the overall expectations of what you want to see your team at, right? So anyway, really, really try to optimize for level 5s. And I'd love to kind of dig in during this conversation into how you can detect them and how you can also train them to get better and better over time.
Interesting, right? And just for clarity, level 1 is people that are useless. Level 2 is just task monkeys that execute. Have you found that it's possible to get someone from a level 3, so a problem solver, or level 4, a systems thinker, into level 5, a superstar? Or is that something that people actually come in, right, and you kind of find out very early on where they are on that pyramid or the triangle, and it doesn't really change over time?
It takes a ton of training, right? I think you might be able to get lucky and get it done with one or a few people, but in my experience, it's just kind of something that people come with, right? They grew up that way, and it's kind of like they grew up with a quest for excellence, and so they're able to kind of either be there or get there very quickly. or in most cases, if they've always been level 3s or level 2s, then it tends to be pretty hard to get them to a level 5.
Interesting. So now, right, I guess the holy grail is, and what we'll dive into today is, as you start to hire as a startup, how do you get as many level 4, so system thinkers, or level 5 superstars in as possible, and with as high of a hit rate as possible, so that there's not a ton of attrition. And so let's dive into this in 2 parts. First, right, hiring pre-scale, meaning as you go from 0 to roughly Series A, and then hiring as you scale post-Series A. And so to begin with, say I'm a founder, right? I just raised my first round, and now I need to hire my first few employees. How should I think about it?
Yeah, first of all, you have to take a step back and look into your co-founding set, right? You and your co-founder. Because the most important thing is to think about who you're going to hire first. So when it's you and your co-founder, look at the overall scope of competencies that both of you cover, right? And the reason why you had to look into this is you need to cover as much as possible of the scope in order to get to product market fit as fast as possible. So let's say you are 6 out of 10 at backend engineering. Your co-founder is someone who's really good at selling and talking to customers and growing a business. So that will mean that most likely you'll need to get a backend engineer to kind of like cover that gap to build something that will allow you to hire the first, to get the first customers, right? It's really kind of what are the gaps that you and your co-founders have that you'll want to fill relatively quickly to be able to get to early PMS. Once you've identified that, I think you can start looking into these types of candidates.
Interesting. So maybe before we dive into the candidates, or to make it tangible, looking back at when you guys got started, what were the dimensions that you looked at, and kind of where did you guys see that you actually had gaps as a founding team that you needed to fill?
Looking to me and my co-founder Matthias, I was really good at growth and relatively good also at sales. He was really good at front-end engineering. He was okay at back-end engineering, and could also do product design. And so what we did at that point was we could get in front of prospects and talk to them, and he could design a product, create the front end, but when it came to back end, he was not as solid as he wished he was, right? So what happened was at that point, within 3 to 4 months, I would say, we went on and he brought in Johan, our VP of engineering today, who is a terrific backend engineer. And we knew that what we wanted to build required to have a really solid infrastructure in order to be able to serve our clients.
Were there any other dimensions, right, that you can, because especially as a company evolves, there's obviously a lot of additional dimensions that you want to add, but were there any others that you looked at early on and decided that it just wasn't necessarily critical yet, and so backend was the biggest need that you guys needed to fill?
All you need early on to find early PMF is just talk to users and write code, right? And so as you're talking to users, I could get 3 to 5 new potential users every single day that I could talk to. And then my co-founder Matthias could design a product, create the front end that we could show to them. But then at the time we were building a product that the very first version of Attention at the time was a product that would give you real-time coaching during your conversations. And so there were a lot of technical difficulties around and challenges around latency and making sure that you could send the right message to a person at a given time, right, without too much latency. So at that point, Matthias could build an MVP, but then we needed to have someone who was a little more experienced in building these sorts of systems and that was what we needed specifically for a product. So it really depends on the type of product that you want to build early on and what is needed to get you to even a minimal, I wouldn't call it an MVP, but a product that can serve at least a handful of customers.
That makes sense. Now, you figured out almost like what your hire criteria are and what the profile is of person that you look for. Now, right, how do I think about the actual people behind it that I need to hire early on as I build my startup?
I think the first people that you need to hire need to be on the same or need to be thinking very similarly to you as a founder. Ideally, your first employees should have traits of founders, right? They should be either people who have tried to be founders in the past or will want to be founders one day. Because as you're trying to figure out things for product to get to product market fit, the reality is that there are way too many unknowns, and it takes a very special type of person to be able to thrive in this obscurity, right? So I think, in my opinion, there are certain things that you need to try to filter for when looking for candidates, and these things tend to be around what have they tried to build growing up, how have they identified opportunities to make some money, how whenever they came in front of a challenge, have they tried to build their own solutions? Are they scrappy? These are the kinds of things that you really need to filter for in your first employees. And that, applies both for engineers, but also even sales or growth or any other types of profiles that you need to hire for.
Interesting. So, right, I was going to say, there's a lot of people that want to be founders. This has become very cool. There's very few that are actually good at it. So you're saying it's to look much more for signals in the past of approaching things in a somewhat entrepreneurial way, or are certain specific personality traits or anything else that you look out for?
100%. So I'll give you a couple examples. Our VP of engineering, so Johan, he was a founder before. He just didn't know how to sell his product, but he built something incredibly robust and difficult when it came to what he was building. The second thing is, even like, he's relatively scrappy and has a hacker mentality. One thing that he built for himself to always be on top of everything, he built a mobile app that will send him a notification whenever an article made it to the top of Hacker News. Right. And so he always knew everything for everyone. He would get those top ranked Hacker News articles. And even better than that, actually, he knew about Hacker News, right? He had read every single Paul Graham article. He knew everything about YC, and that's what, when Matthias told me, all right, it's time for us to hire our first VP of engineering or our first engineer. For me, after I had an hour-long conversation with him, I was in love with the guy. Right? I thought he was almost kind of like our sort of co-founder in a way.
That makes sense. One of the things I also found interesting, and I think you touched upon it a tiny bit when we last talked, is that you said ideally you don't just want to have a person that knows how to get things done, so that entrepreneurial edge, but also ideally someone who truly understands the startup ecosystem, thinks about it all the time, and so on. Why is that important from your point of view?
A lot of people know or think they know what startups are supposed to be like, but they have no idea, right? It's like walking into an entirely dark room and figuring out how to light each part of the room. And a lot of people don't realize that. And so first of all, knowing exactly that you're going to have to walk into that obscurity is something it's something that very few people really know how to do. But also the other thing is, even knowing the entire ecosystem, right? Like, what did the best startups that were there before us do in order to be successful, right? Who are the people that we should kind of like look up to in a way to be able to repeat what they did? And so knowing all of this kind of gets you on this quest for excellence that very few people are truly aware of. And so even like forget even like hiring your first employee, even when it comes to choosing your co-founder, right? Matthias and I, we were second time founders. When we talked about all the top things that we retained, or the top 10 experiences from our first startups, 7 out of 10 were overlapping. We had the exact same lessons from our last startups. We both had read every single hologram article that was out there. We we knew everything about all the YC ethos, even though we didn't go through YC. But regardless, we still knew all the things that really mattered for us to get to product market fit. And so getting the next employees that you have in your team, they almost have to be kind of like co-founders, because you're going to have to navigate that obscurity together to get to your early product market fit.
That makes a lot of sense. And kind of in today's day and age where so much of that information, especially now with deep research and everything, is so easily accessible, people not doing the work is very telling with regard to what they're going to be like post-interview, basically. So we talked about what kind of people you want to hire early on. Where do I now go out and find these people, especially if I don't necessarily have them in my immediate network, or if you identify a skill set that isn't necessarily in your kind of first degree connection network?
I spoke about John, our VP of engineering, who was actually directly in my co-founders network. The next type. So let's talk about, the first sales reps that we hired at Attention. So for a while, by the way, it was only the team was only me on the go-to-market side of things, and then a few engineers on the team. I think we were about three or four engineers building, and then me distributing early on. We then needed to hire 2 account executives and I'll tell you why 2 and not just 1 in a second, but we needed to hire for sales, because we were getting so much inbound that we needed to start serving this inbound, and I couldn't deal with it myself. I had 14 to 16 sales calls a day, every single day. So at that point, I tried myself to hire for sales reps. What did I do? And this is one of the mistakes I made pretty early on, is that I just posted a job posting on LinkedIn. I also posted on my own LinkedIn profile. And what happened was I got quite a lot of candidates, but they were terrible. And eventually someone recommended one really good candidate that I interviewed. And there was another candidate also that I had interviewed that came from a relatively larger company. Both of them got all the way till the end of the interviewing process. I made an offer to both. I got them to talk to each other because they were going to work together. And then they both talked each other out of the process. And so none of them had taken the offer.
Do you know how that happened?
Yeah. So I ended up making an offer to both, and then I did tell each one of them that they would work with another AE, a founding AE that was going to work with them. And so each one of them asked me to connect them with the other AE that they were going to be working with. I did that, and that was a terrible thing. That just they got on a call and they both talked each other out because of the risks of behind the business and how early it was, which in hindsight was actually the best possible thing that could happen to us, right? But again, yeah, they talked each other out, and so it was back to the drawing board. And then what happened was one of our investors connected me with probably, or most likely actually, the best recruiter in the US when it comes to your early go-to-market hires. I'll give him a shout out, Ian Feeney at CCP. And so I went to that point through a recruiter, and I think the right recruiters will definitely make a difference for you. Some of the best founders out there still hire through TCP. Austin Hughes at Unify, who you recently interviewed, also hires through him. He's kind of like the secret weapon of every best founder. So I went through Ian. He told me exactly, very differently from most other recruiters. He didn't have 20 or 30 candidates to send my way. He told me, I have one guy for you. He's the perfect guy. Jacob Fleischer, interview him. You'll like him. And so I go through an interview with Jacob, and I realize why Ian told me that I was going to like him. He was extremely scrappy in the stories that he was telling. He was giving so much details. He was such a great storyteller. I felt like I would buy anything from him, right? And so he goes through the process, and I ended up hiring him. And then there was another recruiter who sent us a candidate, who also we ended up making an offer. But this time what I did was I did not tell, and it was a bit deceiving, but I didn't tell each one of them that they were going to work with another AE until they both signed the offer. And interestingly enough, so I'll go into why two AEs instead of one. You need the two of them to compare to each other, to compete with one another, but also to kind of learn from one another, right? And so the slope ends up getting a lot more extreme when you have two AEs instead of one, and they don't have any excuses if things don't work out. And by the way, that was something that I read super early on from Jason Lincoln's SaaStr blog.
That makes a lot of sense, right? And you kind of take, again, right, you have, if at least one of them is competitive enough, they'll set the benchmark for the other one, and you know quite quickly who's cutting it versus not. What's interesting is you said, right, you hired two at once, and the one you thought was more of a B candidate became the head of sales, versus the one you thought was going to be a superstar, actually ended up quitting. What happened there? What did he get wrong this early on?
So this is what happened. Jacob, when he interviewed with us, on his first interview, he actually didn't know anything about our competitors. He didn't know much about our space. He just kind of came unprepared. And when I realized that at the first interview, I called it out, and he responded, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I've been working till 11:30 p.m. every single night. I should have come better prepared." And actually, I thought that was a great signal, honestly. I thought that meant that he worked extremely hard. Even though he didn't come prepared, I told him, look, you didn't come prepared. I'm going to give you a second chance. You're going to get through the next round. But, and I'm going to have one of our sales advisors interview you. Make sure you get it right this time. And he crushed it, right? And so you could see how he went from point A to point B. But anyway, when we made Jacob the offer, and then we made Connor the offer, I initially thought that Connor was going to do better than Jacob, simply because of that, one signal of not being prepared. So I hired both. And then what I realized was that when they were both on the job, Connor really valued his work-life balance. At 6 p.m., he would leave every single day, or 6:30. Jacob would stay later, would kind of work twice as hard, would try to do his best to go after big logos that we didn't necessarily get inbound. Whereas Connor was actually more of, the kind of person that would deal with inbound deals really well, but not really try to get out of his or expand his comfort zone, right? So what happened from there is that within 3 months, I started to get a really good understanding of who was going to lead the sales team. And I remember we all went to SaaStr, and I saw Jacob actually get out of his way and talk to every single revenue leader out there to get meetings. He actually booked the CRO of Carta at SaaStr for a startup that was, still in its first year, whereas Connor was actually just, trying to grab beers with with people that he already knew, right? And so those are some of the things where you see that one will actually, nothing's big enough, nothing's really difficult enough for him to go get, whereas the other one was kind of like a lot more confided within his comfort zone. Now, what's really important out of this is once you see who are the better the better employees in the team, you need to rethink about how you interviewed each one of them and how you kind of iterate on your interviewing process to try to filter out for the qualities that each employee has.
Fascinating. Can you make that a bit more tangible, right? To kind of, yeah.
Absolutely. So, all right, let's get to the point where now I know that I don't want someone who will leave the office every single day at 6 or 6:30. I want someone who actually will work twice as hard, who will get out of their comfort zone, who will not be afraid to hunt, right? Who is more actually specifically very scrappy. And if they see a problem or they identify a problem, they'll work around it, right? Then at that point, you have to come up with a few questions that do not address that problem directly, but actually give you the signal. So one way to understand how scrappy they are, for example, is ask them the following question. It's the YC question. Can you talk me through a time when you hacked the system to your own advantage? Right. And that question will actually, you'll see it directly in their eyes, right? Are they, do they have a million of stories? Do they have a million stories? Are they even like struggling to find the best one? Will they give you one or two or three immediately? Whereas some of the other ones will even ask you to explain what your question means, right? Um, and so Jacob had I remember really well that I had asked him that question specifically, and he came out with not just one, but two stories. And that didn't really hit me as much then. But ever since now, when I ask this question, I know exactly how the scrappy people are going to respond. Um, so find specific, and I guess also ChatGPT today can also help you find these questions when you're trying to filter out for something without necessarily asking directly, "Hey, how scrappy are you?"
And ChatGPT helping you, right? We discussed this as in you upload your transcripts of the conversations and it gives you very direct feedback depending on how you prompt it. Maybe just for those that want to do the same, kind of how did you prompt it and then what came out of it with ChatGPT?
Yeah, so very recently we had an engineer leaving us for work-life balance issues, and what I did is, so every single one of our interviews is getting recorded and transcribed, and so I took the transcripts, I uploaded it into ChatGPT because our product is great for sales, but not necessarily for interviewing questions. So I put it into O3, and then I asked O3. This candidate told me that he was fine with working 80-hour weeks. However, he ended up quitting uh, after 2 or 3 months for work-life balance reasons. Can you tell me exactly what were the questions that I asked wrong or how I should have doubled down on certain questions? And give me also some of the red flags that I could have identified, right? So O3 will think really well through these things and tell you exactly within the answers some of the really low signals that you could have actually identified, but you didn't really think about twice, and tell you, all right, these are the questions, the better questions that you should be asking in the future, right? And so one of them is, for instance, um, very simply, can you walk me through the an ideal work day that you have, right? And so at full productivity, and so they'll go in and they'll tell you, okay, um, I get to the office, I start checking my emails, and then you tell them, no, no, hold on, let's take a step back and let's do it this way. 9 a.m., you get to the office, you check your emails. 10 a.m. And so they go in, and then you want to see, do they end their day, for example, at 5 p.m.? I go home, I log off. Or do they keep working, right? They tell you, okay, I go till 6, 7, 8 p.m., then I grab dinner, then I try to read some things to keep refining my craft, right? And so some of it are these things where you're able to kind of filter out for quest for excellence. And this is, I think, like the third time that I mentioned quest for excellence, but it is extremely important, right? When you're building a startup, you're all the odds are against you. You have to defy the laws of physics, and so you need people who are extremely hardworking, who are on a quest for excellence. They want to be the best at what they do, and so your entire goal is to try to extract that out of them. Um, and so it's not just through the stories that they tell you, but even de- in a deeper way, you have to go back to their childhood and almost like a therapist, try to extract that out of them, right? And I kind of learned that from the Citadel 5 hour interview that they give you at the end of the process with a therapist who just kind of like gets you to talk through your life and who you looked up to, what type of childhood you had, what were the things that you tried to resolve growing up, and so on. And so getting uh, all of this signal behind the stories is extremely powerful for you to know exactly who you're hiring.
Do you have any specific questions that work particularly well outside of the like walk me through your day for that?
Yes. So another one I would say is so I try, for example, to avoid candidates who are too extreme, right? Like either on the one end of, let's say, the political spectrum or another one. And so I'll ask them questions such as, what makes you mad about the world today? And I'll see how political they get. If they get too political, generally it's a bit of a red flag, right? Um, I would say another one is I'll ask them about, let's say it's a salesperson, it's a sales rep, right? Um, I'll ask them about their quota, and they'll say, "Oh, I hit 110% of my quota uh, every single month." And then you'll try to kind of provoke them a little bit and say, "Well, why wasn't it 150%? Why didn't you try to get better?" And then from there, you will see, do they blame themselves, or do they blame the system, right? Do they say, "Oh, it was the territory that I was assigned to," right? And so if they blame the system, then that's going to be problematic. And you should know that the best people are actually always kind of like taking blame and trying to get better. I remember even, very recently, one of our best employees, um, who was, who is a level 5, we're gonna give her the best possible grade. My co-founder and I asked her, "How do you feel about your quarter?" And she went in and just told us all the things that she did wrong and that she could have done better. And my co-founder and I started laughing and we're thinking, wait, you're actually perfect this quarter. And those are the types of candidates that you want. Um, I would say that the last one is so that's kind of like my signature move. When I start an interview, most people will start with introductions. I don't start with introductions. I go with this very difficult question right away, which is, I want you to walk me through the 3 biggest failures or mistakes that you've had in your life and how those pivotal moments led you to who you are and where you are today. And again, that sets an extreme high level of transparency at the beginning, from the beginning of the conversation. They walk you through their childhood, the difficulties, the setbacks that they had. But also, again, you try to see, are they going to blame the system, or are they going to take full ownership? Are they going to say I, or are they going to say we slash they when talking about the setbacks? And when they're going to talk about how they overcame certain things, try to see if they're team players or not, right? Are they going to also give some credit to other people in their team and how they solve certain things? Or are they going to, again, take full ownership? I did this, I fully succeeded there. And so some of those things, and again, you can take after that transcript and put it back into ChatGPT, and basically try to detect for those types of signals as well in the conversation.
And just to make sure, right, that's right. So when you're failing, it's I that you look for, and when it's achieving or winning, then it's we that you look for. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. So, or to rewind very quickly, and take a step back. So initially, right, we said if you look for great candidates early on, it's either your network or recruiters work well. Any other sources or channels that have worked well for you, where you haven't just gotten volumes of people that didn't really work, or are those two kind of it, at least that worked for you in the early days?
Yeah. In the early days, it's only been recruiters and people who worked with our employees, right? You just want to go through the high signal. Making them as higher early on is way too expensive for your business. So you really don't want to mess that up.
Yeah.
And so I would, people could think hiring a recruiter is expensive, but actually mishiring is way more expensive to your business. It could actually kill your business. So really, really, really make sure that the people that you hire early on are actually not only aligned to your culture, but also are really good at what they do, right? Try to assess their slope from point A to point B.
Now, right, I think the other reason why people don't use recruiters is because there's not many recruiters who are actually good at helping you hire, right, almost a founder type profile versus the scaling type profile. What do I need to look out for when I start to engage with recruiters, given their importance as a middleman in this process?
In full transparency, I'm not very good at understanding what recruiters are good until they send you the candidates that you're receiving, right? So what you may want to do instead is look at the best startups that you truly admire and ask them who they work with. Ideally, especially in your early days, try to directly ask the founder or the founders that you admire and ask them which recruiters they used early on. So Ian Feeney in our case was a recommendation from one of our investors who told us that the founders of Ramped had used Ian Feeney really early on. And then when I talked to the guys over at Ramp, they told me that he was the most exceptional recruiter that they ever used. So it's really per recommendations of recruiters. And then you'll see it even within the count that they send you, right? A lot of recruiters will send you 10 profiles a day. You don't want that. You'll want the one recruiter who actually has vetted them for you and will tell you, after having spoken to you for quite a bit, understood what you're looking for, where you were looking to get that business, will actually kind of like a matchmaker tell you these are the people that you should be talking to.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, right, we talked about the behavioral part of the interview process, but that's obviously not the only part of the process. And so in your early days, and again, we're kind of pre-scale hiring, what did your actual, did you even have a formal interview process, or what that kind of looked like and what worked well for you back then?
I think it was pretty chaotic at first. And then I just refined
it always is, yeah.
It's so even to this day, it's still kind of like continuously finding product market fit within your recruiting process, right? Keep looking for mishires and kind of iterate on that. The process itself. So I'll tell you how it was early on and then how it evolved. So because we were just a team of 3, 4, 5 people pretty early, well, the way we did it was at first I would do the first interview, then I would have an actual leader who would be an advisor or a friend or an investor do the next round, and then my co-founder would take the last round. It was really intense for me because I had to really interview a ton of people. And then when it came to the questions themselves, you just kind of like had to fine tune the questions that you asked. So just like don't have a million questions to ask, and just kind of like try to have 4 or 5 that help you get that signal. And then you should be able to double down on the answers that each candidate will give you, right? And try to go against what they're saying, try to provoke them, try to see how combative they get, or how much how coachable they are. That's an extremely important trait to have, right? Because otherwise they're not going to be able to grow in your business. So we initially did things that way, and then over time, as the team grew, what happened was my head of sales, Jacob, knew exactly what I wanted, and then our head of BD, who reported to also Jacob, our head of sales, knew exactly what he wanted and what I wanted. And now, for example, it gets to the point where the process, let's say to hire BDRs, Noah will do the first round of interviews, then they go with Jacob. And then what will happen is if Jacob says yes, then we'll make sure that they meet the smartest employees that we have in the business who will do the selling for them. And at the end, they will actually meet with me and Matthias, who will do kind of, I will do the anti-selling. I will play bad cop, and Matthias will play good cop just before me, or sorry, just after me.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I think before we go into how the process has evolved, kind of want to do more follow-up questions on the early parts. So when you do early on, you only had the 3 interviews, right? You, then an advisor, and then your co-founder. That's very few interviews to hire someone, and there's a lot of things to cover. Maybe help me understand. Maybe I'm sure each of the 3 interviews had a specific theme or something you tested for. What did those 3 interviews look like early on?
Yeah. So my interview has kind of always been around detecting the quest for excellence and trying to see like how much of a founder trait they had, right? So a pretty simple question has kind of been, in an ideal world, let's say you're about to retire, you look back into your career, what would you define as the peak of your career? And then you kind of like get an idea there about how ambitious they are, right? So really early on, the main thing that I was caring about was just asking as many questions as possible about their ambition, their willingness to grind, and trying to detect how scrappy they are. That's it. And that would generally cover the 45-minute to an hour interview. But also, if I really like them, I would try actually at the time to sell them the startup, because you can't really afford to anti-sell at the time. Then if I really like a candidate, I would pass them on to an advisor. Let's say we'll take the example of sales, right? We had a handful of sales advisors that were helping us build in our space. So they would go through them and they would specifically instead of trying to get a culture fit type of assessment, they would actually just really dig into the traits required for sales, right? So they would do that part for us. In retrospect, I didn't have that much of an understanding of how they would interview people. I just fully trusted them to know how to do this, because that's what they did most of their time at their own companies. And then Matthias would actually kind of, his interviewing style is very different from mine, which is, instead of anti-selling, he actually is, and being as intense as I am, he would actually be very relaxed with candidates, making them feel almost a little too comfortable to the point where they overshare, right? And then Matthias would come to me and say, okay, this is a problem. The guy told me about his, I don't know if this is a good thing to say on a podcast, but he would be telling me, oh, this guy, overshared about this one time where things didn't go well in his relationship very recently. And so he had been out drinking every single night. You're like, okay, so that's a red flag. We're not going to be sending an offer. And so he has a way of extracting that sort of information about people, and he only tries to get them to talk about their personal lives and not that much about work, actually.
Looking back now, right, that you have a lot more experience hiring, would you do anything differently, specifically in the early days, right? We'll get to the later days afterwards. But for specifically in the early days, would you adjust the process, or what were some of the major kind of aha moments that you've had since then?
Yeah, I think I was talking about it a little earlier, which is the biggest recalibration that we did was going through recruiters. Most people, again, will tell you not to go through recruiters early on, but especially if you don't have that big of a network in a specific field that you want hired, go through the right recruiters. And actually something that I would absolutely redo is just not hiring through anyone, but the best actual recruiter. That's extremely important. And I made that mistake over and over again, where I still ended up accepting to take candidates from one recruiter. And as a matter of fact, even as you know, yesterday, literally, I had a BDR from that recruiter just quit. And it's the same recruiter that sent me Connor, who had also quit pretty early on, right? So um, the main thing that I did was tell the team, we're going to stop taking candidates from that recruiter. So make sure that you get the right recruiter in place. And you only take candidates from that one recruiter for that specific role. And then more specifically around your questions, I really think that the questions that you're going to ask are highly dependent on the culture that you're looking to build, right? So that's another thing. You need to be very, very much understanding of what type of culture you want to build, what type of people you want to have at your company, and then just keep refining the questions until you get to a point where you feel like you're getting to early product market fit there, and keep tightening and tightening that product market fit.
That's very interesting, right? And you showed me you guys have a culture fit sheet at Attention. Can you maybe walk us through what's on that culture sheet? So folks understand, right, kind of what you look out for during the interview process.
Yeah. So I'll spill the beans here. I would say the first one is abundance versus scarcity mindset, right? Which is extremely important. And so what is basically their attitude towards the opportunities and the challenges? How does the candidate view the world, as either full of potential or limited resources, right? And that's extremely important.
What's a good question to ask to tease it out?
Yeah. Tell me how you think about your competitors, both internally and externally, right?
And what do you look out for then in terms of signals with regard to how they answer?
Do they view competition as a zero-sum game, or do they view it as a way to keep getting better and better, right? And so, and you try to get that immediately from what is the first thing that they're going to say in their answer, right? Are they going to say, I love competition. Without competition, I wouldn't be as good as where I am today. Or I hate losing, right? You're eventually saying kind of like very similar things. But if you go through, I hate losing, it's very different from, I always grew up in a competitive world because it allowed me to get better and better over time. And if you're playing a competitive space as a business, it's going to inevitably force you to get better and better at shipping your product, at selling, at whatever it is that they're working in, right? And so it really depends on the vocabulary that they're going to use there.
Is it fair to say like hating to lose is not a bad thing, but how you respond to it is what matters, right? Does it motivate you to get better, or does it just get you frustrated because you hate losing?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Fair. What's next on the culture fit sheet?
So blame orientation, which is something that I talked about earlier, right? Do they take responsibility for their failures, or do they blame external factors? The next one is the driver versus passenger thing, right? I think Frank Kluman talks about it in his book Amp It Up. Do they are do, what is their level of initiative, right? Do they drive their own success or do they wait for direction? For that, actually, I don't really ask any questions, but I just try to hear it in their stories.
Are there like specific questions you ask when they talk about certain things that are signals for that?
Yeah, so that one, I rarely ask specific questions around that. I think when I tell them to tell, I ask them to tell me about their biggest mistakes, for example, or failures in their lives. You'll actually detect from their stories whether or not how they took things, how they took control of things. How did they kind of like return or turn around a situation? I think you keep like doubling down, and sometimes some of the best answers are not in the questions that you ask, but in a direct way, but actually how they tell a specific story. And you're trying to detect over time, like how much are they driving through things, or how much are they just waiting for their leaders to tell them what to do.
That makes sense. What else is on the culture fit
Yeah.
sheet?
So the work ethic, right? Like, are they going to put in extra hours, nights and weekends when needed? So that one is actually not in the interviewing questions. But what I do and what I've done in the past, and some people might call me a psycho for that, but um, I so I remember this one time I was hesitating between two heads of growth. Um, I emailed both of them at 10 p.m. on a weeknight. Um, and then what happened was, and I had, a receipt, a read receipt that would get sent to me if they opened the email. So both opened the email, right? Um, the first one, Stu, actually, who was at a concert that night, walked out of the concert and called me immediately. The other one waited the next day to respond, right?
No.
And that really meant everything to me.
It's when we diligence startups, when we invest so early that there's not much there. So it's similar to recruiting, signals matter a lot more. And one of the things that I do is I do like to send emails late on Friday evening or Saturday morning to see again what the response times are to those. And typically it's more loaded questions where you have to think a little bit. So that if you want to fundraise and this is everything, then prioritizing this on a weekend is the least you can ask for. And so I couldn't agree more with this.
That's really, I love that, right? So that's something that I kind of even did last weekend. I took each BER, right? We have about 5 BERs in the team. And I took a LinkedIn post that I really liked, and I sent it to each one of them separately on Slack. And then it was not necessarily an experiment that I wanted to run, but more of a realization after the fact. The top three actually responded to me. It was on a Saturday night at 7:20 p.m. exactly. The first three responded to me within 30 minutes with their thoughts. The fourth one responded Monday morning. And then the fifth one, actually, who just quit yesterday, had not even responded to me, right? Uh,
That's very telling, yeah.
and that, yeah, so this is really highly correlated to your performance.
No, I couldn't agree more. Sense of urgency, ultimately, because speed matters so much. What else do you have on the culture fit sheet?
So I have, quest for excellence. I think I really insisted a lot on them. That really goes at the top of the list for me. The slope strength. So how, what is their potential for growth and development? So for some candidates, you might tease it out better than others. I'll share something extremely tactical, actually. Let's say for salespeople, right? You'll put them on halfway through the interview process. I would put them on a cold call simulation with an AI bot, and I would give them 2 runs. The first one is a dry run where they just kind of like talk to the bot. And then I'll give them feedback, and then I'll see within the second run, and I'll give them intentionally a ton of feedback. And then I'll try to see in the second run how much of that feedback they were able to ingest.
Fascinating. And then I'm assuming, right, quest for excellence is just more trying to understand how important it is for them to get better and how they actually do it to get better.
Yeah, exactly. Or to be the best at what they want to be, right? How ambitious they are and how much do they work on themselves? How much do they like to get coaching feedback? How much do they like to just double down, right? At the end of the day, the best people at what they do, it's not just in startups, but even in sports and music and every single field, are obsessed with continuously getting better. And so there are a lot of signals that you can get there through their stories, but also kind of, the even how much they read about their craft, right? Um, there's not necessarily a single way to filter for that. There are a lot of ways. So I think it's a combination of how much intensity they put into trying to become the best possible at what they want to be, but also how ambitious they are, right? What is the ceiling that they set for themselves? And that's also extremely important.
Yeah. I asked this question to CTO in their portfolio recently, or co-founder CTO, what he would change with regard to the dimensions that he looks at with regard to early hiring. And he said he would over-index way, way, way more than they already did on just the obsession with getting the thing done. Right. And they kind of, right, and getting it done as well as possible, which means, right, obsession also with, right, the quest for excellence. So there makes a lot of sense. What else is on there? I know I guess there's a bunch of dimensions. So yeah.
And the last one, so I think it's important not to have too many. So you kind of like end up narrowing it down. And for me, it's these kind of 7 different things that we filter for. And so the last one is basically how politically extreme they are, right? One way or another. And so, that people who initially used to be how non-woke is a candidate, because wokeness can really kill your business. Eventually, I kind of tweaked it into how politically extreme is someone and just try to avoid one way or another. Just get people who are getting work done and are not going to start talking about things that do not belong to the workplace.
If we go back to what you said earlier, which is the process, right? You said nowadays, back in the day, you said do the first interview. Now it's actually others that do the initial interviewing. You then put them in front of the best person for that specific role in the company that does the selling. And then you do almost like the Citadel type interview at the end, where you open, as you said, with the question, right, about the failures. And you've also called it the toughest interview of their life. Help me understand, right, kind of maybe some of the nuances of what makes it the toughest interviews of their lives. And then also as a second part of it, which has become very important, the anti-selling piece that you do at the end as well.
Yeah. So I think it's important to say that because they already spoke with our smartest employees who really did a good amount of selling before and really attracted them, I can now afford the luxury to do a ton of anti-selling and be extremely tough in the interview. And so I generally know that by the time they get to me, they probably did a good amount of diligence on the business. They know, they read some of my posts. They probably listened to some podcasts. They know a lot about how I think. And so they kind of like get the intensity that I have, right? And so a lot of them are a little stressed out at the beginning of the interview. And when I start with that question about the 3 failures or mistakes, they're under a ton of stress, right? They know that they can't really mess this up. And so I keep digging into every single thing that they say. I try to find the contradictions between what they say. Um, I will go back into their childhood. I will ask them who they looked up to growing up. I will try to really kind of like find deep down what motivates them behind every single thing that they do. I will try to anti-sell them as much as possible um, throughout the interview, just not necessarily by what I'm saying, but the intensity in how I'm saying things, right? So I remember, for example, one of the candidates that we hired, at the end of the interview, I told him, hey, look, by the way, we're 5 days in office and we work every weekend. What he responded was, I'll come 6 or 7 days at the office if you let me, right? Um, and that was such a strong signal for me to understand that it was just not like, hey, yes, I'll do it. It's actually, I'm fully embracing it and I really want to do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's just right. So everyone's understands what exactly it is. Like, what's your definition of anti-selling, and why do you do it?
Yeah. A lot of companies will try to sell you their company on things such as work-life balance, working 3 days a week. We have great perks, we have great snacks. Yeah, all these things that came from the Zerb era. I really think that the best types of candidates actually are rejecting that and want to really grind, right? Because of kind of, a higher purpose, right? They want to be, they have ambitions, and they want to get there. And so the definition of anti-selling for me is to actually say that that there's no work-life balance. They're going to have to work 80 to 100-hour weeks. Yes, of course, you're going to get really good at what you do. By doing that, you will be with a team of superstars. But I try not to emphasize on that too much, because if they're smart enough, they'll have detected earlier in the process. And so I'll really try to make it sound like the nightmare opportunity in terms of work-life balance, not in terms of outcomes for your personal self, but in terms of just like what your life is going to look like working here. Um, More from an involvement perspective, but they'll have talked to really nice people before who are really smart, who are really humble, who went to great schools, who are just on this quest for excellence. And so very naturally, you'll know that they're inclined towards getting in that kind of like mindset or not, or they'll tell you, hey, look, I don't think this is for me.
Are you worried, right? Because there are some incredibly talented people that work slightly differently, and grinding isn't always the best way, the most efficient way, right, to get things done. Like, what I've had to learn is I perform best when I work at a high intensity, but at a pace that is sustainable in the long run. Are you worried that, right, you scare away some incredible people through that, or is that offset by, right, filtering through the almost like there's a bunch of great people you may not get because it's not a fit, but you're okay to pay the cost because you filter out a lot of other people that you could potentially mishire by making it sound this extreme.
I'm not worried about that because in our case, at least, we don't have to hire dozens of people every week or every month. You just need to have one person for a specific role. And so it's okay if you're not, if you're missing out on someone who could truly be great, but um, it's not down for grinding, right? I think, especially in this day and age where it gets so competitive, you have to get people who are extremely smart and are willing to work extremely hard. So, it's just on to the next one. I think when you get way bigger as a business and have to hire in massive batches, it starts becoming maybe a different problem that we'll have to think about later on. But for now, you're optimizing for the present, or you really, and at least in my case, I really need to get people who will not lower the bar and kind of contaminate the rest of the team.
What I found interesting is, right, there's very different definitions of what grinding is. And so I interview a lot of potential candidates for the companies we're invested in. A lot of it is around fit and intensity fit. And one of the questions I like to ask, or what I like to dive in on, is, right, have them describe the most stressful kind of 2 to 4 week period that they went through professionally in the last year or two, then really get into the nuances of what that actually means, right? Get it to rate them. How stressful was it from 1 to 10, 10 being the most stressful, then try to figure out the hours, the responsibilities, and so on. When there's a bunch of people where 20-hour days are not that stressful and others where 12-hour days are stressful. And so that also gives a good understanding of what grinding truly means for them.
That's a great breakdown. I like that.
What I find fascinating as kind of last thing on the anti-selling is you told me that a question that you like to ask towards the end is, if you had the contract in hand, why wouldn't you sign? Tell me why you asked that question.
Actually, I got that from Brian Chesky on the art of hiring when he presented here in New York. So, and I thought it was brilliant. So they went through a really tough interview where they had to be extremely transparent, right? They had to tell you every single thing that came out of their minds. It was kind of like almost talking to a therapist for an hour. And then you do a ton of anti-selling and tell them, hey, look, like you're going to come here, you're going to be working 80-hour weeks. I'm going to call you at 10 p.m. on a weeknight and make sure that something's done. Sometimes I'm going to send you a message at 7 or 8 p.m. on a Saturday, make sure that things are done by 10 a.m. on Sunday. How are you thinking about that? And, you ask them all these little things and make it sound as tough as it is. And then the last question that you ask is, okay, if you got an offer right now, why wouldn't you take it? And they just personally, they went through this entire hour of grilling where they were so transparent about everything that they will tell you. They will tell you, look, either they will tell you actually, all the candidates that we hired would tell me, no hesitation, I would sign immediately. I would not even think about it twice. This is incredible. Or you'll start seeing them being a little hesitant or saying something like, well, I'll have to look at the other offers. I'll have to think about, they'll come up with a bullshit excuse, or even they'll tell you the real reason. Hey, look, I'm not down for all this work, right? And by the way, the last piece is, once you made the offer, I don't negotiate on the offer. I get it every time. Let's say my head of sales, head of BD will come to me and say, hey, this guy actually just got an offer where they offer them, I think like 5 or 10K more annual. Do you want to match it? And I'll say absolutely not, because that beats the entire purpose of why they should join this startup. They should not join it for the money. Yes, they'll make great money if they're successful, because we don't cap commissions for sales. We pay engineers really well, but there should be a higher purpose into why they're joining the startup. And at the end of the day, some of the best employees that we have did not even negotiate that much on their comp. They just wanted to join because they knew that they were going to become the best versions of themselves, right? The higher purpose is not about the money. Yes, it is expensive to live in New York City, but we pay people relatively well. It should be something else. It should be about being driven by excellence.
It makes a lot of sense. Last question, kind of on this before we take a step back. Right, early on, you hire for founder type folks. How does that change as you start to scale the organization more? And you hire a lot more for kind of, I'm assuming, right, you start to hire for more domain expertise, or is it just, can they get things done?
We would start with pretty strong generalists who are people who are specifically, this founder type. And then over time, you hire more and more specialists. So to be more specific here, VP of growth, Stu, was, a really good generalist. He could do everything going from SEO to automated outbound to ads to content to everything that marketing thought about or you need it within marketing. But he was not necessarily an expert into all these things. He was probably just really good at one thing, and that's okay. He also had a background where he did investment banking and private equity before. So that's typically those types of profiles are great generalists, right? People who went through either management consulting or banking PE, because you know that you know that they could be relatively good generalists. In our case, Stu actually did these and then did growth at ramped and then came to attention. And then the next profiles that we hired were specifically growth focused roles. One guy just for automated outbound, one guy for biz ops, one guy for content marketing, right? And so at that point, when you're starting to go for more specific roles under that generalist, you want people who are spiking at one specific dimension.
Which is a great segue, right? Because I think Ben Horowitz once said, especially early on, always hire for strength, never the lack of weakness. What's your take on that specific quote?
So very early on, I disagree with that. I think that you need really strong journalists really early on that do not have as many weaknesses because who do not spike in one thing, but actually just do not have many weaknesses because you cannot, especially in this world where things are so obscure, you don't know, you're still trying things out, you're still iterating. You need people who can be Swiss Army knives, right? I do think that later on, as your business grows and scales, yes, you need to have people who spike at one single thing from a skill perspective. However, you still need to always stay true to your culture fit grid and how you want people to be. And so if you always, I gave you those kind of like 7 things that we look out for in every single candidate. That will always stay true, whether we're a 100-person company, a 10-person company, or a 10,000-person company. And so you want to make sure that people fit into that mold, but then spike into one thing specifically from a skill perspective.
It makes sense. I don't know how Ben meant it, but I'm assuming he doesn't just mean domain expertise, but also right when it comes to strengths, potentially character traits or whatever. And so I guess in your case, intensity and learning, obsession and learning curve is probably the strength that you want to hire for, or to go more to startup building in general. What popular advice that is often given to startup founders and operators do you disagree with, and why?
One thing that people will tell you to do is just listen to your customers and build what they want. If you take as basic as it sounds, if you take the Henry Ford kind of quote, it says, if I listened to my customers, I would have built a faster horse, not a car. And this still applies today, right? 90% of your clients will actually pull you in a direction where you might end up building a faster horse. And typically they'll pull you towards either feature parity with another tool that they use for, but now we'll try to get you to sell it to them at a lower cost, or they'll get you something that is 10% better than the alternative, right? And so they'll kind of pull you towards the present / feature parity versus getting you to build the future. And so the reality is, getting to product market fit is as much of a science than an art. And so you really have to figure out who are your smartest customers. How are they hacking your product together to get things that they really need, and find signal there. So I'll give you an example. One of our features, and we were the first ones to release that over at Attention, it was AI scoring of reps, right? So how do you score a rep after each call? And one day I was talking to Austin Myers, one of our clients. He was the VP of revenue at Certificial. And on a call, he tells me, hey, this is how I use your tool actually. And he was showing me all these little prompts that he built that inside of the product that were scoring each rep after a call. And then I thought it was really smart. So I took that to my co-founder. We discussed it, and we ended up building an actual feature that scored every single rep with AI. And that worked out extremely well, right? Our client, we kept, from the minute we released that feature, our growth kind of like took another direction. And whereas we had a lot of other clients who were telling us, oh, wait, I want to be able to comment on calls. I want to be able to put in, feedback to reps on calls, but they already have that in Gauntlet. They already have that in other tools. The reality is, the way you want to think about it is 1 or 2 steps further. It's all right. When I put comments, I want to maybe train or fine tune a model that will leave similar comments in the next calls for reps. Right. And so that's kind of like how you need to extract the signal from these specific requests, try to understand deeply why they want to do this, and what is a way to 10x everything that is out there.
Building a great product is as much about, or even more so about, what not to build versus what to build. So 100%. Last question, because a lot of people that listen to this are thinking about becoming founders or have just started. What's the one piece of advice you give to someone that is just starting a company or is thinking about it?
In this day and age, when your competition is only getting higher and higher, it's really easy to build in a specific space. Let's put it this way: if I were to build in 2025 a complete new business, I would look into a specific vertical or niche where the incumbents are not VC backed, but actually PE backed, and are kind of getting pretty obsolete, or they actually own most of the market, but they're not innovating that much, right? I think in our case, we went in a space where the main incumbent is VC backed, is extremely strong. And that really, not only that really forced us to have to step up our game, but also it scared a lot of VCs from backing us, right? One of the founders that I really like a lot, Marty, the founder of Pylon, he went actually in a space where he built for customer success, and the leaders were, I think, Zendesk and another PE-backed company. And this is where he has, he has this ability to grow faster because Zendesk has not been innovating at all. So really, I would say try to look into these verticals that are PE-backed, that are led by PE-backed companies that are not really innovating as much, and just go full speed there.
Well, that's a fantastic one, and a great way to end it with. This was incredible. I learned a lot today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.